Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another Motor1.com Test Car Happy Hour. We're so happy to be here with you today and to have you joining us slowly as those numbers tick up, hopefully. My name is Seyth, Miersma, editor-in-chief of Motor1.com. Joining me today, we have managing editor Jeffrey Perez. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, good to be here.
And we've got senior editor Brett T. Evans as well, out in sunny LA. How you guys doing? Good week so far?
Yeah, so far so good.
The short week after a holiday weekend is always an interesting time in the life of an organization, especially a media one. I'm really stoked that we were able to get this together today. So last year we did this a little bit earlier, closer to halfway through the year, but we've been talking about this for a while, and travel schedules and just general alignment on being able to get on the podcast has pushed us back. But we are going to talk about the best cars and the worst cars that we've driven all year long, right? So right off the bat, Kyle's going to throw it in the show notes here. We'll have this linked in the description, in the YouTube description, and elsewhere. But we already have post up on Motor1.com. So if you guys want to go and get a little preview of what we're going to be talking about, you can check it out there. I actually encourage you, if you're watching it live, to just hang with us and watch it in real time. But I got to throw that out there for people who are watching this after the fact. This is always a fun one to put together. It's always, for me, like very head scratching to figure out like, what did I actually like the most? And one of the things that I would actually call out as being the worst cars that I've had this year. Everything is so interesting when it's new, I think, and you have recency bias for stuff that you've loved. Maybe sometimes like it's easier to feel some distance from something you haven't driven in a while. It's just a really interesting exercise, whether you're doing it in July or early September. But it's going to be a fun one. So I want to tell everybody who's watching right now, like throughout the broadcast, like as we're listing our cars, we would love to hear what you think, either whether there's something you drove. If you drove really interesting cars this year, good, bad, or otherwise, let us know. Like, what would your picks be? Or if you've just been following along, like if you're a normal reader of Motor1 or Inside EVs or other automotive media, and you kind of know the new cars that have come out, been launched this year, read a lot of those first drives, what do you think like should be on this list? What's the most impressive car that you've read about or seen this year? What's one that you think just wasn't up to snuff for whatever reason? We'd love to throw your comments up there. As always, if you have questions, if you want to call us dumb for choices we're making, or if you want to laud our absolute brilliance, we're happy with either of those. So be free in choosing what you'd like. But where do you guys want to start this one? Should I just call out a name and we'll start with one of our favorites? Are we starting on the positive side or the negative side?
Why don't we make a double stuffed Oreo where we go positive, negative, negative, positive?
Okay. Positive, negative, negative, positive. Cool. All right, Brett. Good suggestion. You go first.
All right. Let's see. My favorite car that I drove this year, one of my favorites was the Volvo V60 Polestar, the Volvo V60 Recharge Polestar engineered. And it was just like, it was everything you could possibly want a car to be. It's got 455 horsepower, 523, I think, pound-feet of torque. So just a stupid amount of power for a station wagon, at least so far. And then it also gets like 30 miles of all-electric range. It'll get 30 miles per gallon on the highway when you're totally out of battery juice. Like, it just kind of feels like everything you could want in a car. And then it also has tons of cargo space. It just is like such a good blend of attributes. I will say it's a little sterile of a drive. It's not super like exciting and involving, but it's just an awesome, like really awesome daily driver. I also felt very cool, like in this car. Like, this is one of those cars that like when you just roll up to a place and people who know, and people who don't, it's fine. They don't care. Like, it just is one of those like inside jokes that just made me feel very, very cool. So definitely a big fan of the V60 Polestar.
Yeah, this is very much a if you know car, right? Because people aren't going to look at, as we've got some Polestar history rolling on the screen. That's amazing. No average person in Los Angeles is going to see this car and think like this is something particularly special. Is that fair to say? It looks cool. I actually always think Volvo wagons are the most beautiful Volvos. And I think the proportions and the overall styling of this thing is great, but they're not going to know that this is, a kind of badass sports wagon, right?
Well, and when I posted on my story, and like some of my friends who don't know on Instagram, some of my friends who like don't know were like, why are you getting stoked about a station wagon? There's still kind of that, like, Volvo or not, there's still kind of that like cringe factor about station wagons for some reason. But that, in my mind, that just makes it all the more cool. Like, it is just a very radical, awesome machine. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah, the V60. I mean, I love the V60 just platform as a whole. The new one is just so good. I've driven the cross country, which I think might be my favorite personally, just the weird liftedness of that wagon. But I drove the S60 Polestar engineered, and I really, really like that car. It is sneaky fast, like sneaky dynamic. The brakes are a little weird because it is a plug-in hybrid, but I mean, to get that much power and performance in a station wagon, I can understand why it's one of your favorite cars you've driven.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly about the V60 in general. I mean, we every probably 3 or 4 weeks, like, it pops up on our, like, my boyfriends and I, like, nightly, like, Craigslist cruise where we like look for a V60 with the City Weave interior and the the good wheels and the good good options, and see how much it would cost as like a daily driver. So yeah, in general, it's a great car. But this car has absolutely like vaulted to the level of, like, in a few years, if they ever come down in price, this is going to be something that I genuinely want to own for myself.
It's also just for those in the know too. Like, it's kind of a fun moment for Volvo with the Polestar engineered kind of tag on it, right? So obviously Polestar is its own brand now, has been broken out in its own electric vehicle brand. Yeah, we love the video of Brett with his car in Sweden too. It looks like you were having a full-on Nordic experience there. No, but this is a return to the roots of Volvo and Polestar a little bit, right? Which was, as we were seeing, like a race car maker, a performance tuner, and has been involved with Volvo for a long time in making things go fast. There have been other V60 wagons, Polestar branded V60 wagons that were not electrified, but for them to bring that together, right? The electrification of a Volvo branded like gas engine car, I think is really neat, and to do it in a way that's giving stunning performance. That number, by the way, still, like, I feel like I'm still a little out of touch with like the modern acceleration figures. When I see 4.3 seconds to 60 in a car like this, that just blows my mind, right?
I know. It's funny that, like, you could call that underwhelming in any situation, but, like, I mean, the reality is we live in an era where M3s are 3-second cars, and like, it's just insane to me. But I completely agree. Like, when you're actually driving down the road, it's just such a fun, quick, sneaky quick is a great way of putting it, Jeff. It's just such a great machine.
Yeah, it's a super fun car. It's a very kind of like car person car for sure.
Yeah,
This is a car that they're going to sell, with all due respect to Volvo, they're going to sell like 14 examples of this, and everyone who gets one is going to love it. It's going to be, a car that is well sought after and retains value, I think, very well, because it's so rare and so cool. I just love it. Like, what is not to love about this car, frankly, especially when you're looking at just like, again, like, step back a little bit and say, like, here's an experience we had, a car that's like, just nothing like this is going to exist again in the near future. So I think it's
gold seatbelts. Gold seatbelts are always awesome.
Yeah.
More seatbelts in weird colors, man.
I wholeheartely agree. Now, if only we could get the buckles tinted too. Can we get some matching buckles as well?
I want like a heat treated titanium buckle with like the rainbow swirling.
Yeah,
that'd be good. I think that happened accidentally in some like 1970s GM products. It was just poor quality control.
Sure.
Some like bad chroming, but Brad, that's a super, super fun one. So, well, Brett, should we stick with you for one of your worst, or do you want to move on?
Sure.
To one? All right. So what's one of your worst? What's the parallel?
So in the written story, Jeff mentions this a couple times, and so do I. There are no such things as like bad cars for the most part anymore. Like, they're all decent, like, there are definitely better and worse, but generally they're okay. So one that kind of falls in this like generally okay, but there are many better options for me is the Jeep Compass. It's fine. It does a fine job. The 2-liter turbo engine is much better than the old 2.4-liter naturally aspirated. Like it's a perfectly adequate little SUV. The issue is I drove a Latitude model. Didn't have leather seats. It did have like full active safety, which was nice, but it didn't have leather seats. It didn't have like ventilation, not a whole lot of like luxury features. And it was a $35,000 proposition. And at that price, you could get yourself into a Kia Sportage hybrid, which has more power and more efficiency and is larger and better equipped. You get into a Honda CR-V, which is nicely equipped and is offered as a hybrid and is just kind of like the brass ring for, adequate crossoverness. This was just kind of like didn't really tick a lot of boxes. The one caveat I will say is, along with Subaru, Jeep is the only one that offers like a pretty genuinely off-road capable compact crossover. There's like it's like this, the Subaru Forester, maybe the Mazda CX-50, and then the Ford Bronco Sport. And otherwise, you don't really get a lot of off-road capability in this segment. And as you can see with this Trailhawk model, you do actually get some with the Compass. So that's the only caveat that I'll give. But otherwise, it was just kind of a forgettable vehicle. It got me from A to B. Didn't really do anything special. Nothing really stood out when I was done with it, except for that high price. It was like, why? Unless you're getting a great deal from the dealer, which you might be, why would you pay $35,000 for this car?
Yeah, and $35,000 is not the Trailhawk model either, right? Like, so we're
right.
So
that's for like a very mid-level Latitude model.
Yeah, I mean, I get it as a total value buy. Like, if this is the Compass, nobody is going to be offended if you buy a Compass because you got a great deal like at your local Jeep dealer, right? Like, as you're saying, like in terms of basic transportation, it's great. I think if you really need to have 4-wheel drive capability, it's as you point out, like it's a good option. But none of us here would pick it over the Subaru or the Ford option, like in this space, partially because of the age and like a little bit about the packaging. Yeah, it's not much of a standout. I think the Trailhawk sets itself apart, but then you're in kind of a totally other price class. It's just really hard, like on both directions, to stand out in compact and mid-size crossover or SUVs right now, because there are a billion of them on the planet. So
yeah, there's just so many good ones, and the Compass just doesn't really nail the basics. I think the newer one has a nicer touchscreen and some nicer stuff if you go for the premium, models. But then again, you're almost $40,000 for a compact SUV that isn't nearly as good as some of the alternatives. So yeah, it's pretty low on my list too of things I've driven this year.
Well, you kind of get a feeling for it with these pictures. You do. So this is the 2023 model, and that's the same one that I drove. You do get that really nice big touchscreen. The interior styling borrows a lot from the Grand Cherokee, which I think is a good thing. But not only is it like a compact overall package, like you don't have a ton of headroom, cargo space is definitely toward the back of the class. There's not a ton of like stuff space either. Like you get these tiny little cup holders, a tiny little bin in front of the shifter, and then a little cubby underneath the armrest. The last time I drove, I think it was the Sportage. It was just like sliding trays and bins and cubbies, like all kinds of places to just like put your wallet and your key and your phone, which you just don't really have in this product. And that's like one of those things, like one of those like really weird added value things that you can't point out on a spreadsheet, but it really does make the ownership experience just like a lot less convenient. And so, just little things like that kind of just added up to make this like a kind of a painful, not painful, but just kind of a not so positive experience that just didn't really add up to me.
I mean, you can also see it for sure in like some of this just comes down to the overall like age of the platform and the vehicle itself. Like, because again, we're looking at press photos and video of the highest trim level and seeing like interesting detailing and stuff like that. That's all well and good, and people will love that. But like when it comes down to like, is the screen is larger, but is it positioned in a way that makes sense, or does it feel like it's sort of tacked on? Like, have they done the thoughtful engineering that they need to do to get as much utility inside of a small space as possible for people who are almost certainly going to be using this as their only vehicle, right? Like, but like in a lot of newer Stellantis brand products, they've done that really well. right? Because they've had time to think about it as a problem. And here, what you're doing is kind of building on what already exists, which is already more or always more challenging, I would say. So, understandable. I have such a funny, like the very first Jeep Compass was the second long lead program that I ever did in 2005 or 6. I can't remember when it was. And so I still have a windbreaker from it, if you can believe it. Like that doesn't get a whole lot of use, but I never forget your first or second long lead. Cool. All right, Jeff, let's move on to you. What do you got? Let's go. Same deal. Let's go. Best worst.
Best worst. Let me start with my second favorite, I guess. The BMW i7, which is their new big, massive electric sedan. That thing is just an absolute, like, it is one of the best luxury cars you can buy. No joke. I think I said this in my review that it feels a lot like a Rolls Royce. Obviously, it shares a lot in common with the Ghost. And it's just such an amazingly good machine. So nice to drive, comfortable, quiet. The electric powertrain is really, really good. The top end model for the EV trim, you get 308 miles, which is solid. I mean, it's not it's not lucid, but it's solid. And then the big calling card here is that massive screen in the back seat, that 31-inch screen that flips down from the ceiling, and you could watch, Netflix, whatever. It is like, for as ugly as the front end is, it is one of the most amazing cars, I think, on sale right now.
Have you been in, would you say, like most of the mainline competition for i7 at this point? EQS? I mean, obviously Tesla doesn't let us drive cars, so we haven't been in like top trim Teslas. We've obviously driven like multiple variants of the Lucid Air. That I would say like at least are roughly in this category.
EQS and Lucid are also great. They feel very different. I think BMW really went all in on we're just going to build a living room on wheels. We're not going to make it sporty. It doesn't need to be that fast, even though it's decently quick with the electric powertrain. They just wanted to make the most luxurious BMW I think they could ever imagine for a sedan, and they did a really good job of that. The EQS and the Lucid, like I said, they're definitely sportier. They have some really interesting technology too, but they don't feel nearly as just inviting and comfortable when you jump in either the front seat or the back seat. I think this would be a great car to be driven around in, which I'm assuming a lot of owners will be doing.
I have a huge problem with the EQS's rear seat, especially. Like, it's just for some reason the high floor and the kind of a swooping roofline make it feel so much less accommodating. Kind of in the same way, actually, to be fair, as the Lucid. I know last year we had some issues with, with the Lucids that we all drove that like it's kind of hard to like fold ourselves in and out of the back seat. That's not the case with the i7. This is still just like a massive, in spite of the fact that it's like an electrified version of an ICE car, or electrified and ICE were co-developed at the same time. Like, it's still just so like limited in compromise. Like, it's still such a good product, whether you go for either powertrain, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, and it has the magic doors. You just push the button and all 4 doors will open by themselves, sort of like on Rolls Royce. They just, like I said, they just did everything on this car you could imagine.
Yeah, I mean, this car has so many party tricks too, and I agree. Like, one of the best back seats in the business right now in terms of, like executive cars. Not that I've been in all of them, but in many of them, like, it's enough to certainly give like my box a run for their money. The tech is incredibly impressive. BMW has always done this, right? Like, BMW's kind of DNA has, especially on like the 5 and 7 series level, has revolved around that combination of luxury and technology, right? And so they're leaning in on the electric version of the 7 series in a way that I think like really resonates with those of us who have covered their products for a long time and people who have owned a lot of different BMWs. So we've talked about this before. Like, I had the 760 version of this car with roughly the same experience from a like just sitting in it standpoint, and The giant screen is impressive. It's super cool. I don't know how practical it's going to be day to day, but it almost doesn't matter, right? It fits the vibe of what you want to have in your ultra luxury executive car. And even the styling here, which I know is really divisive. Obviously, every time we talk about BMW, like styling comes into play in the last, like generation of vehicles. I just think it works so well here. I don't think it's pretty. I think it's really imposing and really impressive and looks like a car that costs every dollar that this one actually costs and probably more. Right. So in that way, they really pull it off.
And that's sort of the modern BMW MO, is just like, whether or not you think the cars are good looking, they are identifiable. You're not going to mistake this for an S-Class or G90. Like, this is a totally, totally unique, interesting car, and it just nails the luxury thing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good pick. All right. Let's get one of your worst.
So I started with that one because I feel like I needed to introduce a nice BMW before I went to my least favorite BMW, easily my least favorite BMW, and one of the cars that I really didn't love driving this year was the new X1, which is their sort of compact entry level
2 thumbs down
SUV. It's fine. I mean, like Brett said, and like we've all said, it's just like there are so many better options out there. It looks okay. It's quick enough. Like if you want it to have the nice leather or the fancy technology, you will have to pay extra, and then you could probably spec this thing out to 50 grand before the M trim. It just did nothing for me, and it's so weird because my BMW fandom is like, the i7 is amazing, the XM is amazing, the 2 Series is amazing, and then it's also like they build the X1 as well, and you're like, oh man, this is a totally, totally different experience than some of the other BMWs that I've driven recently. But yeah, I didn't love it.
Yeah, to me, so I had an X1 a few months ago, and I feel exactly the same way. In fact, if you hadn't sort of picked this one first, this might have been on my list as well. It's got all of it's sort of like a little kid wearing grown-up clothes to me. Number one, like all that stuff that we just talked about with the 7 Series, at least for me, that very aggressive and really imposing styling that works well on a larger format, like on a bigger, wider car, to me just looks garish on this vehicle. So right off the bat, like the eyes are telling me that's not something I care about. I'm willing to get over it. Like I love driving a lot of BMWs that I'm not particularly in favor of visually, but then the driving experience is just like so average for the company that's supposed to create a really compelling driving experience, right? Again, not bad, not awful. It's a lot louder than I expected it to be. Like just not as refined overall. The one that I had, this is always something that's very hard to deal with, but like if you're going to do like all kind of light colorway interiors, I think you need to work really hard to pull that off. And the particular variant that I had, I'm not beating up on that. Maybe it's nicer with a different interior treatment, but it was kind of beige over beige, and it felt very rental car-ish in a not inexpensive small BMW crossover, right? So I think that it's difficult. Like, it is difficult, as we talked about just now with the Jeep, with the Compass. It's difficult to pull off like a smaller format SUV in a way that feels really compelling. But a company like BMW has got to do it if they're going to charge the prices that they need to charge to make money on it.
Yeah, the base price is okay. I think it's just over 40 grand with destination, which makes it actually pretty competitive. I think only the Lexus is cheaper. But the problem is that you get basically nothing. BMW is pretty notorious for charging a ton in options, and they really, really do it here on the X1. I think the one I drove was almost 50 grand before some of the fancier packages were added, and that's pretty high for the class. And like Seth said, it was just so unremarkable to drive, like totally fine. I had way more fun in a GLB. I had way more fun in the E-Pace, even though that car is has its own issues, and like I don't know, it's just one of those where you're like, what is this by the time you're done driving it?
Sure. I don't think, like, again, we're kind of just talking about in a vacuum. Like, I don't really mind the X1 in a lot of ways. So, like, philosophically, I don't like it at all because it's a front-wheel drive BMW, and that just feels perverse to me. But, like, beyond that, like, getting off that stupid chestnut, I don't mind it. It's just the fact that like the GLB exists, like this car and the GLB exist in the same timeline, and there's just no question in my mind which I'd rather have. Even like, I don't love the GLA, but even the GLA, like I might even consider that over something like this. What are some of the other like vehicles in that space? I heard you mention Lexus. Is that the UX that competes in
You
this
can get the
space?
Lexus UX, you get the Audi Q3. I would say maybe even the Volvo XC40 is kind of competitive, which I think the Volvo
Yeah.
blows this car away. So there's a lot of good competition. I mean, basically every luxury brand has sort of a small to smallish crossover that you could look to instead of this. So it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, what does GV70 start at?
Yeah, GV70 even it's probably around the same, 40, 45. So, and that's a really good one.
Yeah, I just like there's too much. There are too many excellent SUVs across all spectrum right now to be able to put up with any kind of premium. It's harder on the premium makers even than it is on the non-premium makers to make it work. So again, lots of people are going to own an X1 and have zero problem with it whatsoever, and think that it's a perfectly nice car. But I think when you're in like our seat and you have to like actually compare things to other new things that are on the road and competing for those dollars, it changes the equation a lot. So not the best BMW this year that I drove either. Full agree for me. All right, so why don't we switch to me? We'll go. I'll go with one of my best. I've got a lot. We've got a lot of Stellantis overall on this list on both sides, and certainly a ton of my picks. So we'll stick negative, right? I'll stick with one of my worst and I'll go for the harder one because this one really kind of tore me up a little bit, to be honest. I've talked about both of them on this podcast, but I had the Dodge Hornet and the Alfa Romeo Tonale, not quite back to back, separated by 1 week, right? So I had them in very close succession. And the reason that I picked the Tonale E all-wheel drive, that's the plug-in hybrid version of the car, as one of the worst cars that I drove this year was almost certainly that close context with the Dodge Hornet, which cost a lot less money than it and was far, far more compelling, right? So again, like what we're talking about here, shades of gray, like the Tonale is like a lovely vehicle, actually. Like the styling is beautiful. Like it does have nice handling. The powertrain is compelling when it's fully charged. In this case, like it feels nice, but for the $60,000 that you're going to spend on it, right? And we're talking about a plug-in hybrid with, again, like something in the 30-ish miles of range that also adds, it's a performance hybrid too. So when that battery goes dead, like you lose that kind of initial electric acceleration, you're still dealing with the weight of the battery pack, right? This isn't something that we dealt with like fairly extensively in our first drive. And overall, I could deal with any of that. I'm actually like a kind of a proponent of plug-in hybrids that have like some usable level of range, because I think a lot of people can, get to work and back most days with it. But when you look at that with the price, when you look at that and in the context of the fact that this is meant to be a kind of a performance SUV, and then especially when you see that like just down the street, like at the next dealership, the sister dealership, you can get a very competitive product for $10,000 less, like across trim levels. It's just hard for me to understand the exact value there, unless you just happen to be a gigantic Alfa Romeo fan. You really like the badge, you really like the brand, right? So this, like I said, this would hurt a little bit because I hate dogging on brand new cars, brand new models, number one, but I don't completely understand the overall positioning. And if anybody asked me about this vehicle, I would talk to them about Hornet, let alone anything else in the universe that competes here.
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, Hornet is, I just got out of one recently, and it's a pretty good little crossover. I can't imagine paying 10 grand more for an alpha badge version that basically does most of the same things. And I think we talked about this on a previous happy hour. It's just like dynamically, it was either you or Brett had mentioned this, that it doesn't drive like an Alpha, right? It doesn't have that same sort of dynamic quality you want that the Stelvio does have, which is a really nice driving SUV. So that's sort of like, at that point, what are you paying for other than the badge?
I mean, I really liked the handling, to be totally like transparent. I thought it was like really fun to chuck around, but I actually have one in the driveway right now, so I took it for a spin the other day and kind of like reaffirmed some of these thoughts. And it's like a nice, stiff, robust platform and everything like that. But to Seth's point, it's fast enough when it's fully charged, but the engine doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound Alpha-like. It doesn't have that kind of like blatty, like Italian, snortiness that I wish it did. I can't remember exactly what makes it, why I decided it was worth the extra money over a Hornet RT. I did some like weird calculus in my head that for some reason made it worth the extra money. But if you don't need the plug-in hybrid and you are okay with a 2-liter turbo, and I actually think the 2-liter turbo sounds better than this car's, I think it's a 1.3-liter turbo. You can get the Hornet GT for literally $29,000. And I know, we've got a review of the Hornet GT on the site right now, and it's not super glowingly positive, but it's $29,000 for a crossover with like 260 something horsepower and some of that Italian-ish handling verve is not a bad deal. Like that would be the harder sell for me, is going for a base Hornet instead of a Tonale.
Yeah, not to mention like anything else like in the universe too. Like when you're in that low to mid $60,000 price point, like, and again, I promise you, we are not sponsored by Genesis today, but like the Genesis GV60 is a really compelling vehicle that looks great, like in this size class that's fully electric, right? Like that would be an interesting cross shop if you're thinking about spending that kind of money on something that's partially electrified, right? It's not doing enough for the performance of the vehicle to justify the powertrain technology. It's not doing enough in terms of it being an electric vehicle to justify it. And it's not separating itself enough, Brett, to your point, from the base 2.0T, which is pretty good. If you really just like this vehicle, it's not doing enough to justify the price point for getting that advanced powertrain in it either. So I think that one specifically is really setting itself up in a way that's not favorable relative to a lot of things that are fully electric or more traditional, purely gas, or just like something, if you want something that's great handling, you would probably, and don't absolutely need the small utility of a small crossover. Like there are a million sedans that are better handling and more fun to drive than this, right? If you really need utility at somewhere in this price range, there are a lot of SUVs that have like equal sort of economy, but with more space for people or things. The value prop is off for me, right? So we're talking about our favorite, or the best and worst cars that we drove. So I'm cheating a little bit here because it's less about the drive for me, and it's more about like the intellectual argument for it that I can't get behind. So
fair.
Feel ya.
All right. So, well, and the other problem with it too is
another thing. No, but I want to move into one of my favorites of the year. Is the note that I wanted to end on is that and you guys are talking about it too. Like, there's nothing about that specifically, the plug-in hybrid version of the Tonale, that does anything that makes me feel like it's what I've always loved about Alfa Romeo, right? And so it was pretty easy for me to pick the Maserati Gran Turismo Foglio. Jesus, every time screwed up. The Italian ones throw me off, but the Folgore, good Lord, which is the electric version, the brand new electrified version of the Maserati Gran Turismo, as a counterpoint to what Alfa Romeo is doing, because it's got all of the stuff that we kind of all love about really powerful, in this case, extremely beautiful electric vehicles with like crazy torque, instant acceleration, super quiet, a great luxurious experience. But they've done a lot that's really innovative in a way that makes it drive like a Maserati, which I think it still kind of blows my mind a little bit. So the
party trick here, because all the other stuff is very impressive. You know, like the 0 to 60 under 3 seconds, the fact that it will go over 200 miles per hour as a kind of halo version of a Maserati product. Like, you have to do that, and this car is able to do that, right? What it doesn't have to do, but they've figured out a way to do, is make it handle like an Italian, proper Italian GT car, right? And it's not exactly the same. When I drove this car, it was on the first drive program. I drove the V8 model as well, which is spectacular and exactly what you would expect, and very, very emblematic of all of the great Maseratis that I've ever experienced in my life. And this car, like, it would have been fine for it to simply be fast and quiet and smooth on the highway and be okay handling, like many EVs in this class are. But the way that they've done the architecture, the way that they've like centered the mass in the middle of the vehicle, not just on the floor, but also in the center. So there's more sort of, the suspension is working a little bit more, and also much more subtle. The car rotates more like an ICE car would. It's not exactly the same, but you have a lot more of that nimble feeling, that sort of deft turn in on quick corners and quick changes of direction that you would get in an ICE model, that I'm just not used to feeling with even other very good electric vehicles, right? So right away, I think that they've done a sort of, you know, the best job they could possibly do with the existing technology to make their electric Grand Touring car feel spiritually connected to its ICE variant and the cars that came before it, right? So it's a really impressive thing. It's kind of subtle. It's one of those things that you do have to drive the car to understand it completely and experience it. But anybody who is you know, a dyed-in-the-wool Maserati fan and an owner, I think is going to get it right away when they get this car.
I'm just glad they got it right. I honestly, I didn't have a lot of high expectations when I heard they were building an electric version of this car. I think we know Maserati's history recently has been up and down at best, right, in terms of how the cars perform or reliability, things like that. But when I read your first drive a few months ago, I was very pleased that they figured it out. And this car, I mean, just the specs alone and the way this thing looks, obviously, it looks like it's such a badass, just cool electric car, which there really aren't that many really cool, badass electric sports cars other than maybe Taycan and one or two others. So I like this car a lot. I'm glad it performed as well as it did.
Yeah, I agree. Maserati seems to kind of be on the upswing with like the Grecale is getting rave reviews everywhere, and there's a Folgore version coming of that. Seyth loved both the GT and the Folgore coupe, which is awesome. So it kind of seems like they're on the upswing. I hope it continues. And like the what's the German or the Italian word for that sedan? The Quattroporte, and then the other one, the little guy. They were both just like so underwhelming and so obviously like Chrysler part spin interior bits and stuff like that. And it was just such a bummer to see, especially like, you know, Maserati's first generation of like revived vehicles in the 2000s. They weren't like phenomenally reliable, but they were really personable and characterful. And so, for a company to kind of like fall from grace like that, it's nice to see them kind of on the upswing again.
You weren't a Ghibli fan.
Ghibli, thank you. Yeah, no, not at all. I drove the Ghibli Trofeo, which has like the Ferrari-derived cross-plane V8, a V8 powered Italian sedan, and it was just left so utterly cold. Like it didn't sound great, it didn't perform that well. Like I expected it to be flawed. I wanted it to at least sound like a bat out of hell, and it was just like, eh. So I'm really glad that the Folgore kind of gets it right.
Yeah, it was a fun one, and it's in company of a lot of great cars that I was lucky enough to be behind the wheel in this year. So as I'm sure you guys would agree, like tough to pick some of the favorites, right? So, all right, Brett, we're back to you. Your choice, best or worst.
I'm gonna stick to that double stuffed Oreo. So we're gonna do the worst. The other worst car that I drove was the Cadillac XT4, and this again was just like why would you ever buy one of these when so many other options are on the table? Mine listed for about $55,000. That's a stupid amount of money for a car that's actually, I think it's smaller than the BMW X1, and it's priced like a BMW X3. So it just kind of like I don't understand the positioning. And it would be one thing if it was like a really like lifestyle kind of choice with like lots of unique interior fitments or like a really amazing driving experience. But this car had the really unfortunate distinction of being my first press car after I returned from a like I got a piano in Utah. I got my grandma's piano in Utah, and I rented a base model Chevrolet Silverado to bring it home. And this car had the exact same gauge cluster, infotainment, and like infotainment buttons as this like Silverado LS. Like the same font, even. It wasn't even reskinned, and I was just like, that alone. Like I got in the car, I turned it on, and I was like, what the absolute like. I like was legitimately. There's nothing about this car that makes me happy, except the styling. I think it looks really cute. I love the vertical taillights. When I was I did the first drive of this car back in 2018 or whatever it was, and like the lead designer called it an Escalade puppy, and I loved that. I thought that was so freaking adorable, and so I really like the way that it looks. But other than that, there's no other reason. I just was like, I did the math in my head. I was like, you could spend that same amount of money and buy like an X3 or maybe like a base model GLC or a GLB or something like that. Or you could spend $35,000 and get an absolutely hard loaded Chevrolet Equinox and have the same engine, most of the same running gear, the same features. Like, it's not going to be as cute, but like, you're saving $20,000. So I have a very hard time with the XT4. This is one of those where like most cars, if someone is like, hey, I'm considering this, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a fine car, because you're never going to change their mind anyway. They just want confirmation that they're making the right choice. This is one of the cars where I'm like, don't do it unless you're getting $20,000 on the hood. Buy literally anything else in the segment. Spend $55,000 on literally anything else, and you're going to be happier.
Yeah, I mean, this has been kind of a GM problem from time immemorial, right? Like that. Unfortunately, it's easy and more likely than I would say in most other brand ecosystems to do the switch between the older Silverado and the new XT4 at your dealer's lot, right? To really see that too. It's not going to happen. Like this is, to a certain extent, it's a car journalist problem where we're like, well, we got in, out of the Volkswagen and into the Audi, and we have that context. I know that it's like more common for us, but I do think this is a real world experience too. There are so many General Motors products on the road, like across all generations. People will recognize this stuff. And when they do that in a car that's, wearing a Cadillac badge and is premium pricing, it's extra egregious. If it stood out in any way from a driving perspective, then it would be forgiven, right?
Exactly. That's kind of my thinking, is like, it doesn't do anything particularly amazingly, and it kind of gets some things not great. That is a Silverado gauge cluster that you were looking at. Like it was just, and I do know that like some people will make the argument that like repeat General Motors customers, people who trade from a Chevrolet to a GMC to a Cadillac, actually might appreciate this because they already know how everything works. It's all laid out the same. That feels like a very like PR way of apologizing for this problem. It feels like a very like something that like my elderly grandparents would love and be very grateful for, and most other people in the world would be like, oh shoot, like I paid $20,000 more and I'm getting the same experience. Like it's a bummer to me. It just bums me out, especially when it looks like this. It looks so cute. It's so charming and like appealing to look at. I just want it to like offer something special once you actually get behind the wheel and use the thing, and it just doesn't.
I don't think I've ever heard Brett this angry about a car ever.
And I'm like embarrassed that it's about an XT4. Honestly, like this is such a stupid car to have strong feelings about, positive or negative, but I just can't help it. And it's literally because I unloaded the piano, I drove the Chevy to U-Haul. I dropped it off, and when I came home, there was an XT4 in my driveway, and I thought, oh, cool, I'm going to go for a drive. And like within like 5 minutes of all of this happening at the same time, it just ticks me off. I'm going to get over it. I'm done.
I have a quick funny story about XT4 because I know we have a lot of cars, but I got engaged a few years ago in Amelia Island, and I live in Miami, so we made the drive up there, and I asked for the fleet for a car that I could put some miles on, and they gave me an XT4. And beyond just the horribly uncomfortable ride quality and just the thrashy engine and everything I disliked that Brett mentioned. We drove back. I turned the car on, and then a few weeks later, I told the person who had loaned the car to me, the fleet manager, I said, "Hey, we were just talking," and I said, "Oh yeah, I got engaged. When you lent me the XT4, I drove up to Amelia Island." He's like, "Oh my God, I would have given you something nicer if I knew you were getting engaged." I'm like, no, it's fine. The XT4 was fine, but yeah.
I feel like you should have messed with him and been like, "Hey man, like I asked her to marry me and she said no." Like, you think you could have like been a wingman for me on this one and given me an Escalade or a Blackwing or something?
Corvette. Hi to Urban. Good to see you back, man. Let us know when you have a second the best and worst cars that you either drove this year or that you have read about and consumed this year on Motor1 or Inside EVs. All right, Brett, let's go. Let's get you positive now after being all upset.
I know, exactly. I'm all heated up. I need to cool down. Best car, I think probably the best car I drove this year, bar none. Possibly the best car I've driven in years and years and years. Definitely the best car I've driven. Lotus Emira V6. Just an absolutely brilliant, wonderful, like mid-engine sports car that just does so many things well. The one that I drove was a sport specification, so I had the stiffest suspension possible, and it had the super sticky. I think they're Pirelli. I can't remember if they're Pirelli or Michelin, but they're like the super sticky, like track-ready tires. And it was just absolutely brilliant. I mean, so I went for a drive with my boyfriend, and he used to work for Lotus, so we had a lot of like Evoras lying around the house every couple of weeks.
Speaking,
hey, that's me. And so we took this Emira out for a drive, and just instantly both of us were just like, "Yep, this is everything that was amazing about the Evora, just like a little bit nicer, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more cohesive of an experience," and it just was like perfect. And then during that drive, I like looked at him after like one particularly fun corner complex, and I said, "Kyle, our videographer, Kyle doesn't usually get motion sick. This car's going to change that." And sure enough, midway through the drive, Kyle and I were just chatting, and then he kind of got quiet and looked out the front window and just like stayed that way for a little while. And I was like, "You doing all right?" And he's like, "I'm actually getting car sick." I was like, "Yeah, this car will do that to you." It's just so much fun to drive. Such incredible levels of performance. Everything you do, the steering, the shifter, the throttle, it's all just like so fun to interact with. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, no notes. Honestly, it was an amazing, amazing car.
It's also fun because Lotus isn't a brand that we all get to drive most of the time, right? Like
Sure.
There aren't a lot of them. They don't have a big model lineup. They don't have a huge like presence. They've always been like a super niche automaker, doubly so in the US. And they have such a rich history in racing, in Formula One, like with Colin Chapman, with like all of the brilliant models that they put together, that getting some seat time behind, some of Lotus's worst cars is always a little bit fun, just because it's the experience too. So the fact that Emira is out there and it's really garnering rave reviews from people who care about sports cars and know about sports cars, to me, just makes my heart happy, even though I haven't driven the car yet. So
I need to drive one. I'm so stoked after reading Brett's review, because the new ownership change a few years ago, you're like, what are they going to do? They're going to build an SUV. They're going to build a sedan, which have been sort of mixed. So you sort of worry of like, are they going to kind of ruin their sports cars? And after reading Brett's and a lot of other people's reviews, it sounds like they just made it way better. Like, I'm surprised, but I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little heavier. It's a little lower on power than the Evora GT. So like there are a few, like you make a few sacrifices in the name of drivability, in the name of comfort. It's got like a Geely sourced infotainment system that works really well. But of course, like that makes it a more complete car. And some people will decry that and say that it's kind of the opposite of Colin Chapman's like simplify and add lightness. You could make these arguments until you're blue in the face. But the reality is, like, Lotus's final internal combustion sports car is like a very worthy successor, and it just kind of nails it. I loved it. It was a great car. Thank you for letting me get myself in a better mood after talking about the XT4, because it just this is that car for me. Like, it would just make me like I would get off depression medication and I'd stop going to therapy if I had an Emira in my driveway, because it's just so good to drive.
I love that shot. We're looking at the shot from our first drive video, which is just like a detail of the linkage moving that you can see through that, the shift gear linkage moving through it's visible because they like, surfacing all this mechanical stuff. That's another little trick that Lotus has always worked with that I think is brilliant and nerds like, and shows off what they're really great at. Quickly, we'll take a quick break because Urban did say that his congratulations, number one. It sounds like Urban just got his dream car, which is forbidden fruit for us in the US, the Hyundai i20N Performance, which just looks like you guys, are there any Hyundai Performance variants, any N cars that we don't like, at least kind of a lot, let alone like in some cases we love them, right? Like this is the car that I would love to drive the next time I'm in Europe.
Isn't this just like a hatchback version of the Elantra N?
Correct. Yeah, it looks like a ultra compact hatchback with the version that I'm looking at has the sort of traditional N blue that we saw with like Veloster N and things like that. With Elantra.
How could you go wrong?
Yeah, beautiful. Well done. And he's speculating that his worst car, at least the one that he's read about, I think this probably tracks for all of us. Would be the VinFast VF7, right? Or wait, which is the one that
VF8,
my bad. With VF9 coming out. Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about that. Obviously, like it was roundly criticized. We hope that it gets better, but I think if other people are making lists of the worst cars of the year, the VinFast is probably going to be on it. So good. Thanks for the feedback, Urban. All right, Jeff. Worst and best. We'll go sad and happy to round this out.
My next worst is Volkswagen Jetta. I just think it's an old car in that segment. I think Volkswagen is sort of in the middle of a transitionary period with their EV stuff and just in general with their infotainment issues. It's not the worst car in the world. Again, it's a totally fine compact sedan, but it's maybe last on my list behind Civic and Elantra and some of the newer ones that do just a lot of things better. So hopefully maybe there's going to be an electric one. Maybe that'll sort of turn the nameplate around in the next few years, but we'll see.
Volkswagen doesn't get any points at all for still offering a compact sedan?
Sure. They get points. It's affordable. It is affordable.
Compact sedans like this are driving people to crossovers.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
I mean, when I tested this one, this was like right at the beginning of the year, January. The price was still 21 grand, so still super affordable. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think they've since moved that pricing up for the 2024 model. But it is a decently affordable little sedan. It just really doesn't do anything remarkably well. Like it's not super entertaining to drive. The material quality is pretty bad, even for that segment where the Civic and the Elantra are a little nicer inside. So yeah, it's hard.
And frankly, it's not even that surprising. Like over the years, like even as Jetta has been new, like it's been a cool car when it's a wagon, and it's been a cool car sometimes when it's a GLI, right? When it's a performance variant. Otherwise, I don't ever think that this has been, super producer Kyle just made the point that he would take the now outgoing Golf over this 10 times out of 10, which I think is right. Like you're just always losing to your stablemate in the case of Jetta, and even in America, which was probably the target market for Jetta most of its existence. I think there were lots of other Japanese competitors and occasionally even an American one that made it feel like not the best value proposition. So.
Yeah, and GLI is good. GLI is fun. If you want to get it, if you find a good used GLI, I think that's a pretty good little performance car. But anything below that is the Jetta's hard.
Yep, agreed. All right, well, bring us home strong.
Well, so I'll say that I get this question, and I'm sure you guys do all the time. What's your favorite car? What's the best car you've driven? And my go-to answer used to be, thinking of something that I would just buy and love to own, it used to be the BMW M5 CS, which I still absolutely love. But then I drove the Audi RS6 Avant Performance earlier this year, and oh my God, that is the best car you can buy right now. It does everything super well. 621 horsepower, twin turbo V8, 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. I mean, it is legit a supercar with a station wagon, rear. And it's comfortable. Like, you can actually live with it day to day. It's the car I would buy. No money, no object. It is the car I would buy right now, and has to be money, no object, because it cost 127 grand for 2024. But look, if you have the money, you should buy this over any low-level supercar or sports car. I guarantee you will have more fun in this thing on a daily basis than you would in, a base McLaren or something.
It's well, that's a bold statement. I mean, certainly you're going to do a lot more in it than you will in the McLaren.
Sure.
But
yeah,
I just like that we've got the step factor happening here, starting with the Volvo Polestar engineered performance wagon, and now we've got, in true car writer form, another high performance wagon on the list too. Of course, it's great. It does. Why doesn't everybody want to own a car like this?
Every car should just be a station wagon.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny because like station wagons are absolutely dying in the market, but automakers are realizing that like enthusiasts, station wagons are hugely over-indexed to work performance. Enthusiasts want the V60, they want the RS6 Avant, they want the E63 Estate. Like, it's a very weird thing that like Audi can't build enough RS6 Avants. They couldn't give away an A6 Avant, but they can't build enough RS6s, and it's just because weird people who like performance cars also like station wagons, and I love that. Good for us.
And there's so much headroom there. Like, they can make them expensive and they can make them profitable, so they can sell them at smaller scale, especially in a case like this where you're not really, like, the car is beautifully designed, and I'm sure it's got a lovely cabin, and of course it's got all the performance you want, but we're essentially using like parts that Audi already has to put this together, right? It's not like they had to engineer a brand new engine to bring this car to market. So we're just living in a great time where they're like, let's put all our best stuff into a wagon and make it kick ass, right? And people will love it, and they'll pay six figures for it.
Yeah, and like Brett said, they're completely sold out. You can't buy one. Basically, they put them on. They introduced it for 2024, the updated version, and then they opened up the order books and it was basically sold out, in a few weeks. The funny thing though is I'm like, they really touted that on the first drive. They're like, oh yeah, they're sold out. You can't buy one. I'm like, well, how many are you guys building? They're like, well, we don't really say how many we're building. So it's like, if you build 1,500 of them, yeah, you're probably going to sell out. I'm sure they build more than that, but still there's a market out there and people want them, and they are genuinely awesome vehicles.
Listen, if you are an Audi RS6 Avant performance owner or hand raiser, let us know. We'll start just tallying them up and we'll get the number on our own, right? That should work. It's going to be a three-figure number probably, right? I mean, we're not talking about like tens of thousands.
No. Yeah. I think it's in the low thousands.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, this is another one too where I've got to poke our local Audi PR people and see whether or not there's one in Detroit that I could borrow, because I do absolutely want to drive. I want to drive every car on this list, or all of the best cars on this list that I haven't been in, for sure. But that's a great pick. So, all right. Well, we're left with me with worst and the best. I had a lot of choices for worst that I didn't think were really credible, that were fair to pick. You guys would have laughed and probably laughed at me a little bit for picking something like the Polaris Slingshot, for instance, which I don't think it counts as a car anyways. But even though I have more of a warm feeling for the Slingshot than I know you guys do, it wasn't, it's definitely at the bottom half of the list of the things that I drove this year in terms of test cars. I felt a little bit bad, honestly, picking on this one too. We've got older variants on the bottom of these lists across the board. But my last worst is the Chrysler 300C, which is downright ancient. It's really just doing kind of its last farewell tour. This is, I'm trying to think of the proper basketball analogy, almost Kobe Bryant, except for he scored 60 in his last game. An aging superstar who really his best days were behind him by years, and he's just making one more round of all the stadiums. Brett, you and I talked about this car. Like it's still fun to drive. It's still charming. It's still got a lot of power. I think I wrote like it's a fun car to cruise in. It is by no means a it's not an awful car. But when I was really looking at the list of everything, it's like objectively, this is one of the worst cars that I've driven all year. Right? Like it's ancient. It's horribly inefficient. Like although it's pretty comfortable, it doesn't have a nice interior at all. All of the technology is dreadful. And even on the performance level, like cars of this kind of caliber, power and size and stuff are better handling now than they were in the past. Maybe they're a little bit less emotional, but like they offer more utility, more practicality overall. So the poor 300C, I do feel like I'm punching down at it a little bit because I appreciate that it's still out there. But I think we even said it at the time. This is a car that you buy as a like current, a modern day collector's item, even though it's new off the dealer lot and not because it's competitive in any way, shape, or form in the marketplace right now.
Yeah, RIP. I don't know. Like they're just rolling it out for one last special edition for a car that's been mostly unchanged. But the weird thing to me though, too, is like the Charger has been around for the same amount of time, right? The current gen, and it's had a lot more success. Is it just the brand cachet or like the lack of, I don't know, what is it?
What is it that makes it one of the worst?
That makes the Charger so successful and the 300 not as successful.
Oh, I mean, I would. Go ahead, Brett.
I was just say the Charger's been updated. Like it has a fairly modern-ish interior. This is still the same dash design from 2000. When was the update? 2015 or something like that. Like, so the Charger is slightly more modern. I don't think it has the newest Uconnect, but it's still a little bit more modernized. And then, yeah, I think it is just cachet. Like 300C was a huge seller its first couple years on the market, and then it kind of like faded a little bit, and Charger took over.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just like we're at such a weird stage with the Chrysler brand now too that the future is a little bit uncertain. Stellantis has invested heavily in like basically every other brand that it has. Jeep obviously is huge. They're making a bet with Dodge, at least with the new Hornet. So it's the oldest product on the most unloved. In terms of the resources levied on it brand, maybe in America right now, amongst the major ones. So it didn't make a ton of sense either. I don't know. Like, listen, you go and talk to you guys are a lot closer than I am, but if you go and talk to like your average 25-year-old first-time new car shopper, like, do they have any perception of Chrysler as not as an option, but even as like a thing that exists in the marketplace? I would say that increasingly the answer is no, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like with the Charger and Challenger particularly, even though they are exactly as old and exactly as dated, there's a major halo effect coming from the Hellcat cars where like people come into showrooms curious about the Hellcat and end up driving away in a GT or a SXT or something like that because it looks 90% as cool as a Hellcat and gets better fuel economy and is affordably priced. There's nothing like that for the 300C. It's just you either get SRT or 300C or like the base model, and there's nothing in between. There's no halo effect. There's no cheap model to get into. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a weird middle ground that doesn't really do Chrysler any favors.
It's kind of a shame because the design is cool. I think the design is held up pretty well. I love that sort of boxy look. So, but yeah, it's time to put it out to pasture, I think, and I don't know. Maybe they'll bring it back as an EV.
Gloriously retro as a new model for sure.
Yeah, I hope like the EV version or whatever follows it up maintains this like really slab-sided like 1930s gangster look, because that's like the best part about the Chrysler in my mind, especially compared to the Charger. Like this is just such an old school looking design, and I love it.
They can do so much with this idea in an electrified format, right? Like it lends itself super well to a really high performance, heavy, fast, straight line missile kind of a thing. So, but completely modernized. So yes, hope for the future for sure. And yet so far this year, like one of the least impressive cars that I drove, if I'm being completely honest with myself. And then on to, you know, what's probably the best. And again, I started us off today talking about recency bias. This is absolutely recency bias on my part, as the car just left a couple of days ago. But I just got out of a Porsche 911T, 911 Carrera T, which is even somebody who's driven, like I got to do the first drive of the 911 GT3 RS this year, which is a spectacular, just like gobsmacking, unbelievable track car. One of the single, like, most impressive race cars I've ever driven in my entire life. I would buy this one, right? Because it's so low key. It's so perfect in terms of like the getting the essence of what what I want out of a 911 into a modern package. I think they've done incredibly, incredibly well. So it's like the pricing is, all 911s are very expensive, right? But the pricing is attractive insofar as it starts around $125,000 or something like that, which isn't quite as cheap as you can get for a Porsche 911 today, but it's right around there. It has the available 7-speed manual transmission, which is fantastic to use. The version that I had was in the sort of woven, I don't know what the name of it, I'm sure they have a name for it, but the woven cloth seats, which just are gorgeous to look at and really, really feel fantastic. They fit really well. It's a pretty simple seat, but it feels like kind of the perfect sports bucket. And then, we've got a 3-liter naturally aspirated flat 6 engine out back, making 379 horsepower or something like that. That is lovely, right? I mean, it's a perfect engine. It doesn't overwhelm you with torque. It doesn't feel like the fastest car in the world, 0 to 60. I'm not sure what it is. It's around the 4-second mark, probably a little bit more than that. It's certainly quick, and it'll, like, impress you on the way to dinner or something like that. But it's not. We made this point earlier. Like in the landscape of electrification, it's not impressive on a spec sheet. It's just fun to drive, right? So, in a lot of ways, I keep saying, I've already told you guys this, but like, this feels like the 100-year car. Like, this feels like the heirloom car. It feels like a car that I would just want to buy and own for the rest of my life, and make sure that in my will it says that my kids get it when I die. Not because it's entirely special. In fact, it's kind of just the opposite. I just think it's like emblematic of kind of the best thing that Porsche is able to do in a sports car, right as they're shifting to electric vehicles. And I just think that we're going to look back and remember this as being a really special 911 because of the purity of it. So it wins over even, like all of the other variants of 911 that we love so much that are more impressive in a number of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said it all. I mean, the GTS that I drove a few years ago, I got in that car and I thought, this is one of the best things I've ever driven. But I mean, for a little less money and maybe a little less power, and just I can only imagine how perfect this car just must be. And like you said, you would probably own this thing forever and never get tired of it.
Yeah, some of the like higher trims can feel like almost a little unbalanced. I drove a GTS too recently, and I loved it. It was wonderful, but it did feel just like a little, not like overpowered, but a lot of power. And I did the first drive for the Carrera T, and it didn't feel that way at all. It just, like, everything felt very like neatly weighted out, and the power wasn't enough to overwhelm the suspension. It was just a really, really lovely car to drive. Kind of just felt like a really brisk Sunday cruiser instead of like a maximum attack, hardcore machine.
It's also just impressive that they've made like a car that's really basic not feel bare bones at all. Like, it doesn't feel like it's stripped of content. It feels like this is exactly the content that you should have, and that, anything on top of it would be layering on, right? I know a lot of people wouldn't see it that way because they want more performance out of a 911, especially at that price. And I understand that as well. So I think Urban got it right. He said, I think Porsche just can't get it wrong. Even their worst car is better than most of the other cars on the road. And that's true. Like, clearly you're paying a price for that. But if you care about driving involvement, enjoyment, like, driving quickly down your favorite real road. Some of their, GTS is a good example too, of course, but this one I think is really even more on point for that feeling. I will say the only disappointment at all, my car, I should have uploaded video of this one. I know that we've gone all B-roll on this episode, but my car was in Python green too, which is just a standout color. Everybody looks at it. Everybody loves it kind of immediately. It's weird because I feel like very few people buy green 911s, but anytime you see a green 911 from any era, it looks like a really special car, even if it's a base model. So that helped too. And where I started there is my 4-year-old didn't get a ride in it because the rear seats. This one had the rear seat delete. I believe that's an option. I actually have to go back and check that, but there are no rear seats, so we couldn't put a car seat in. So it was dad alone in this car. So I took it out a lot, but it was always me by myself. All right. I'm getting yelled at by our producer too, that we're going over. You guys, this has been a ton of fun. Thanks so much for weighing in with your favorite and least favorite cars that you've driven to date. I want to encourage everybody again, go back and read the article that we have on Motor1.com. If you guys are checking this out after the fact, we would love to hear, please leave us comments either on the article or on the YouTube page, or Twitter or Facebook, or wherever you happen to be seeing this. What are your favorite and least favorite cars from this year to date? I think it's always a fun exercise, something like middle of the year, to be able to pull these out.
We still got more time. There could be new best and worst by the end of the year.
Absolutely. We have a whole Q4 plus to go through. So, Brett, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you next week, Thursday. Bye guys.
See ya.
See ya.